Let's talk about what to do with a vacant unit. How do we get this thing ready to get rented out, be it a single-family house or an apartment unit? I think the first thing that we need to do is think about cleaning. Now, Heather may tell you I'm probably the last guy to be talking about cleaning, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. When you walk into an apartment unit, please make sure that it's clean. If you're the owner or the property manager, remove all the trash, wipe down all the countertops, clean the appliances, sweep, vacuum, wash windows, doors. Make sure you clean out storage areas as well. There's no worse feeling than a tenant having to look at somebody else's stuff or junk that they've stored or collected in that particular unit. I will tell you this. In my 14 years of owning rental units, I know that when a tenant walks into an apartment unit or a single-family house to rent, one of the things they do is open things. They open two things, the oven and the refrigerator. Why, I don't know, but I would say 98% of the time they're going to open those. If you know they're going to open those, make them spotless. If they're spotless, they will comment on it right away. Wow, that oven is very clean. And it looks like it's a little bit older model, but it doesn't look used at all. That's what you want to hear. They'll open the refrigerator. I don't know why, but they open the refrigerator. I don't know if they're hungry. I don't know if they're, right? But they want to see if the light actually turns on and off when they open it, but make sure it's clean, okay? Also check that light bulb. You don't want to have them open it and have the light bulb not turn on. They're going to do that no matter what. So you know immediately, make sure that is clean. I do get a question of, well, I might be buying in an area where typically the apartment or house does not come with appliances. And that happens. Florida, they do that a lot. In parts of Chicago, they do that, depending on the area. I think number one, you need to question about the area why that is. But number two, if that's the case, make sure that you're using that documentation in your lease and you're explaining that up front. This unit comes with no appliances. You have to provide your own, kind of thing. Maintenance. I recommend to use a checklist. Develop a checklist. And the checklist is easy to develop. First and foremost, I would make a list of every room in the house. I would make a list of every item in the house. So in this room right here, I would put on there lighting, flooring, walls, windows, doors. Those are the major items in the room. You also have light switches, outlets, blinds, other things that you could add as well, but you get the point. And then I would make sure that there's a checklist that when somebody moves out and somebody goes in to clean that unit or does maintenance on it, you, the owner or the property manager, can use that checklist to go in and do a walkthrough and make sure those items are repaired. I think that's important. Focus on the visible items and also focus on the mechanical items. In other words, if somebody's going to show, if you're going to rent the house out and show the house to prospective renters, make sure that when the renter goes in there and turns on the light switch or turns on the light switch in the closet, that it works. You don't want to have to explain, oh, the bulb must be out, I'll come back and fix it. Make sure everything works. Okay, I think that's important. I just mentioned about doing a final walkthrough. Please have someone do a final walkthrough. If you're hiring a third-party property management company, make sure this is on their list of items that they're responsible for. Questions with that at all? Cleaning or maintenance? Okay. Let's talk about painting and carpets, something that are big items with rentals, something that are big items with property management. First, with painting. I really like using a process called touch up to clean up. Meaning, sometimes a tenant that lives in a unit, they're absolutely spotless and they're neat, they're clean, and they really don't have a lot of issues on the wall. You don't have to go in and repaint that unit fully. Now you might have some scuffs by the doorways, minor scuffs, or maybe in the kitchen or something like that, I would paint those areas and just touch up to clean up. You might have to paint just one wall or a half a wall, something like that. No sense in spending the money to paint the whole place if it doesn't need it. One color standard, what do I mean by that? If you're going to get in the rental business and have rental homes or rental apartments, I would recommend using a one color standard. For all of our apartments, I use a color that's called bone white. It's exactly how it sounds. It's bone white. It's a little bit off. It's not bright white, but it's a little bit off, and I use eggshell is the texture that I use. It seems to hide a lot. It's very durable, and that off-white just gives it enough contrast to make it look comfortable, inviting, but not institutional or sterile. Does that make sense, everybody? I've used that my whole career, that one color, and it saved me a lot of money, and it's worked very well. If I've got a single-family house and I'm looking to rent it out, people ask me, well, would you ever paint custom colors? And I do. When I'm talking about foreclosures and flips and things like that, painting is a great way to turn that value or increase that value significantly for not a lot of money. For instance, I might paint the foyer, the living room, maybe a main hallway, maybe not a hallway, but the main entry room. I'll paint it a color called lunch bag. I think I might have mentioned this yesterday. It's the actual color of a lunch bag, that light brown tan. And then what I'll do in that living room or entryway is I'll put crown molding up and paint that semi-gloss white. It's a wonderful contrast of colors. So yes, I will. Did I answer your question before? You know how many people, they've walked up, I've answered their question, they walk back down. So it's a wonderful contrast. Now you'll do that if the market would bear something like that. Could you get extra rent for that? Quite possibly. Marginal, but quite possibly. So make sure it's appropriate. I wouldn't consider doing that on a Class C property in a Class C neighborhood kind of thing. You would probably just go with a one color standard, unless the market could bear that. Does that make sense? You want to be appropriate to the market. Carpets, clean. Make sure the carpet is clean. There's no worse feeling than walking in on somebody else's mess. Okay, so make sure the carpets are clean. Replace if needed. Replace if needed. Carpets typically have a lifespan. So make sure that you're looking at that and finding out if the carpet needs to be replaced. Now down here at the bottom, I put on here, please refer to the lease on both items and have the tenant assist. What do I mean by that? Well, now I'm not talking about normal wear and tear, but if I've got a tenant in there and they're staying for a year and I come in upon move out and the place just needs to be painted because it's trashed. They were a smoker, they scuffed up the walls, and pretty much every room needs to be painted. I'm going to charge them for that out of their security deposit. The same way with the carpets. Or you could go with a standard like this. It's the responsibility of the tenant upon move out to get the carpets cleaned, and they're responsible for paying that bill. I would also make sure that you put 1 or 2 or 3 suggested carpet cleaners in there. Not all carpet cleaners are equal. Some carpet cleaners can actually tear up your carpet. So I would use the ones that you know that are good, and I would suggest them or maybe even require them to use one of those companies and prove receipt upon move out. Okay? Those things are totally legitimate. You can absolutely have your tenants assist in both of these items. I see a lot of investors get into trouble, spend more money, when they don't have things in their lease like this. And then they go through, they paint a unit every single year if a tenant moves out, or they're constantly replacing carpets, kind of thing. Have the tenant assist you with that and put those items in your lease. Question?
Yes, John. How do you deal with the argument of normal wear and tear versus damage?
How do I deal with the argument?
That the tenant will make that this is just normal wear and tear. Like
yeah,
for example,
carpets are going to last about 7 years. A good durable carpet should last at least 7 years. Painting, should last about 4 to 6 years, somewhere in there. So that's what I'm considering normal wear and tear from my experience. So if there's something where a tenant moves in and moves out a year later and the walls are terrible, that's not normal wear and tear. Same thing with carpets. And I tell the people when they move in, you're going to be responsible for getting the carpet professionally cleaned upon move out. You are going to be responsible if there's more than just normal wear and tear on the walls for us to come in and repaint the unit. So it behooves you. Who uses that word, behoove? It would benefit you to take care of that stuff. And pretty much if you're selecting the right tenant, you shouldn't have issue. But this is the other thing I got to tell you. We have selected tenants that have come in, and I'm not trying to slant anyone, but they're I know we're not supposed to talk about creed, but I'm going to talk about it here in a teaching platform. We've had tenants that have proactively said they go to church all the time and they spend a lot of time at church and they're wearing crosses. They may even hold a Bible in their hands when they come in, and we'll put them in the unit, not making the decision on whether they go to church or not, but we'll put them in the unit. And then we'll have other tenants that come in and they have tattoos all over them, there are piercings all over the place, their hair is spiked, and you're like, well, I'm basing this on financial situation only, because really you can't. And you know what? They're my best tenants, the ones with the tattoos and piercings, and the ones that are, I go to church all the time, and God this and God that, and blah, blah, blah. They're my worst tenants. So you can't judge a book by its cover. You cannot do that. You have to go by financial wherewithal in making those decisions. But I'm going to try, if we can fit it in, I'm going to try and tell you a couple stories too that I've had with tenants. I'm telling you, this is ripe for a reality show. Between eviction court and managing tenants and all of that, it's something else. It really is right. Do you guys, you want one story right now? I got to, okay? So this tenant comes in the office, and he was one of the people that I was talking about that actually had a Bible with him, and he was telling us how, well, he wasn't telling me, he was telling the manager how his life was, he was reborn, born again, however they call it, and needs a new start, this and that. So we get him in the unit, and you could kind of tell from his story and the person he had just gone through a major revelation in his life. He's looked like he's had a tough time, and he was just ready for a new start. He did seem humble and, all of this, and hey, more power to him. If that's great. I think that's wonderful. I would never judge, and that's wonderful. So he's in his apartment unit, and it's a townhouse unit that we have. And a townhouse unit is a unit that you walk in the front door, and you can go upstairs to the 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. And as you walk into the front door to the left is the living room and the eat-in kitchen, okay? So he is there. Let's just say that this is the picture window. He's got the couch right in front of the picture window. And he was sitting on the couch, and he was reading the Bible. He was sitting there like this. Well, across the street are also townhomes. These townhomes across the street have a garage. Coming down the street was a 90-year-old woman that was having a seizure. She was going into a stroke. She had pressed on the gas pedal. She had come around the street, drove into the garage so fast that there was a refrigerator on the back side of the garage, and it shot out into the backyard. That's how fast she was driving in there. She put it in reverse, stepped on the gas, and now she's headed towards my buddy sitting on the couch, right? And so he hears the commotion and sees the car coming at him at a very fast rate, and he just gets out of the couch, and the car comes through the window. He's unscathed. He's not hurt. He looks around and looks at the Bible, and he says, this was a quote that he put in the paper, This stuff really works, is what he said. That's exactly what he said. So I just want to share with you, this stuff happens all the time. I've got story after story after story about tenants and their antics and just scenarios with that too. So, well, I'm going to get to that. I got one more here in a second. Safety items. What do you do with safety items? You want to make sure that you're walking through and making sure that all the items are in good working order. Everything from smoke detectors, GFI switches, locks, fire extinguishers, carbon monoxide detectors, the general area you want to make sure is lit properly, there's no trip hazards, all of those things. I would have a review. You might even, if you're proactive, have the fire department come out and do an inspection if you're real ambitious, and to make sure everything is in good working order as well, although that may open up a can of worms too, so just make sure you're prepared for that. I like the fact today that the inspector, by the way, was a fireman. I thought that was kind of cool. It adds kind of another level of safety with that. Selecting your tenants. Now, when you select your tenants after you've gone through and cleaned the unit, made sure it's safe, and done all the maintenance on the units, I think you should have written up a procedure that states your guidelines. This could be a one-page thing. Actually, some states require you, if you're a property manager, to have your procedures written up and posted in the office. Please check with the state to see if that's a requirement if you're investing in another one besides Texas. The one-page guideline needs to say something like, we make a selection process for tenants based on the fair housing laws, and those fair housing laws require us to make our decision on the applicant based on financial status only, blah, 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 blah. All of that needs to be posted, as in some states, depending on the state. Remember that when you're selecting that tenant, a reason that you want to make sure that that tenant is being selected based on financial criteria is, number one, they're living in your investment. I can't stress that enough. The overall goal here, as you remember, is to have your tenant go to the 9 to 5, cut you the check so it covers expenses and debt service and puts cash flow in your pocket. If you get a tenant in that property that's not paying you rent, it's going against your whole philosophy. So it would, I'm going to use it again, behoove. It would behoove you or benefit you to make sure that your selection process, that you're serious about it, and you're selecting the right applicants that can afford to live in that unit. Focus on communication and respect. I think that's something when selecting tenants they need to be made aware of. That's probably a good theme for you or a property management company that you're going to hire. Obviously, you're going to treat everyone with respect, that goes without saying, but how do you communicate? Kind of goes back to how people communicate if they've got a maintenance issue. How do you communicate if you need to get a hold of the tenant? What's an emergency contact? Do you have a newsletter that you send out? Are you sending out a letter asking them if they're going to be renewing their lease, if their lease term is coming due? Different things like that. So just getting back to selecting your tenants, again, they've got to be financially responsible. Respect and will treat their property as their own. Do they have responsibility? And I guess most importantly, when you're looking at that application, do they have stability? An example of stability would be, are they at their job for, the last 2 or 3 or 10 years? Or are they at a job every 4 or 5 months and then they're at a new one for the last 2 or 3 years? Stability goes a long way. I also put a lot of weight towards where they've lived in the past. If they've lived in an apartment unit over the last 6 years, they put that landlord or owner or property management company down as a reference. That tells me a lot. I'm going to go ahead and call that property owner or landlord and ask them what type of tenant they were. You have permission to do that based on the application that they filled out. Remember, you have to have permission to check on that information. The application, we went over that yesterday, but I just want to touch on some highlights here. You must have that filled out. I think it's important to have that filled out in its entirety. It really starts the file on accepted tenants. However, even when you decline tenants for tenancy, I think it's important for you to keep those rejected applications. By law, in pretty much every state, you've got to keep those rejected applications from anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So make sure you're holding on to those. In most states, they will accept an electronic file of that as well. Copy ID for each adult tenant living in the unit. I think that's a smart thing to do. Maybe even their social security number, or get a copy of their driver's license, or I'm sorry, not their driver's license, their license plate number. You've got to be able to find a way to track them down if they disappear on you. Some tenants will disappear on you, so you're going to have a chance to track them down if you have the right information that you've collected. So that's going to be important. If you've collected things like social security numbers, driver's licenses, copies of, make sure you're keeping that, or your property manager is keeping that in a secure location. Selecting your tenants, continuing on that, I think what you're going to do is verify the ID, make sure the person that's giving you that ID is actually the person. Credit check, I put a question mark there because I'll leave that up to you whether or not you want to do that. Some property management companies don't do that, and they rely heavily on past rental history and job scenario. I happen to think it's a good idea. However, if you're not flexible and you're looking at credit reports of people, you're going to get an awfully lot of people that have, had some blemishes, but they have nothing to do with how they would pay rent. So I think you need to be flexible with that. Again, I would check out the rental history more than anything. I would verify their employment and the income they make. Asking for their last 2 most recent check stubs would suffice for that. You could check criminal history. A lot of times you could do that in the county that the property is located in, and they do that for a reasonable price. You could a lot of times do that online as well. I would also call and check with personal references. I told you earlier that you wouldn't believe how many times people put a reference, be it a parent, a friend, you name it, on the application, and you call them and they get a bad reference. I find it amazing, but sometimes people are a little bit more truthful than you think. And then finally, if you've run through all this stuff and your tenant is a little bit suspect financially, you could ask them to have a guarantor sign the lease with them or co-sign with them. In other words, you would run your credit or your background check on them, take their social security number, they're going to sign personally on that lease. So if your tenant ends up not paying the rent, skipping out, or something else, you've got somebody else to go back to collect that money. Okay? Questions with that at all? Okay, when you're getting a guarantor or a cosigner, by the way, you're going to get the same information that you would get from the renter. Okay? Same information that you would get from the renter.